One of America's closest allies is buying less, boycotting more, and increasingly looking elsewhere. U.S. alcohol exports to Canada have plunged. Anti-American consumer movements are spreading beyond North America. And even defense cooperation between Ottawa and Washington is facing new strains. What started as a trade dispute is now evolving into a much broader realignment among longtime allies. Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. From collapsing exports and growing boycotts to agricultural disputes and military tensions, here are the 5 developments reshaping Canada-US relations in 2026. Number 5. Canada's boycott. America's wine industry reels. One of the clearest signs of changing Canada-US relations is appearing on liquor store shelves. What began as consumer backlash against US trade policies became a major challenge for American alcohol exporters. During 2025, several Canadian provinces restricted or removed many US alcohol products, contributing to sharp declines in spirits and wine exports. Canada had long been the largest foreign market for American wine, with exports falling by hundreds of millions of dollars. Kentucky's bourbon industry also faced weaker demand and growing uncertainty. The bigger story is what replaced those products. Canadian consumers increasingly turned to domestic wineries and distilleries, boosting local sales. Consumer habits can become permanent, raising concerns that American producers may not easily recover those lost customers and market share. But the pressure isn't stopping at Canada's borders. What began as a domestic boycott is increasingly becoming part of a wider international trend. Number 4. Global boycott spreads. More allies turn away. Canada is no longer the only market experiencing anti-American consumer sentiment. Traditionally, trade disputes were fought through tariffs and government negotiations, but increasingly, consumers themselves are becoming active participants. Across parts of Europe, surveys have shown growing interest in avoiding certain American products. Similar trends have appeared in Germany, France, Denmark, Sweden, and other countries. Brands such as Tesla, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's have become symbolic targets in some markets, while retailers have promoted local alternatives. The impact extends far beyond consumer goods. Changes in buying behavior affect supply chains, manufacturers, retailers, and workers. For policymakers, this trend reflects a broader discussion about economic independence, supply chain resilience, and reducing dependence on any single country. Yet consumer boycotts are only one piece of the story. Another dispute involving a product few people expected is now raising concerns about future trade conflicts. Number 3. Mushroom tariffs. A small dispute with big risks. While alcohol exports grabbed headlines, another dispute could have broader implications for agriculture. In May 2026, the U.S. Commerce Department announced preliminary duties on certain Canadian mushroom imports, arguing that some producers benefited from government support programs. Proposed duty rates range from roughly 1.6% to nearly 5%. Although mushrooms seem minor compared with automobiles, energy, or steel, agricultural groups quickly focused on the precedent being set. Critics noted that similar tax treatments and support programs exist within the United States. The concern is that if such policies become grounds for trade penalties, other countries could apply similar arguments against American exports. For farmers making long-term investments, stable market access is essential. The real issue isn't mushrooms. It's whether this dispute becomes the first of many new trade conflicts. Before we move to what may be the most consequential development of all, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us bring more in-depth industry and geopolitical analysis to fellow enthusiasts here on Piston Pundit. Because while trade disputes are making headlines, the next development involves something even more important: military and strategic cooperation between two longtime allies. Number 2. Defense rift deepens. Trust between allies tested. While trade disputes dominate headlines, the most significant development may be unfolding in defense cooperation. For decades, Canada and the United States worked closely through institutions that survived wars, political disagreements, and global crises. That is why recent tensions have drawn so much attention. In May 2026, the Pentagon announced a pause in participation in the Permanent Joint Board on Defense, citing concerns over Canada's defense commitments and spending targets. At the same time, Canada continued reviewing its F-35 fighter acquisition while exploring alternatives such as Sweden's Saab Gripen. Ottawa also selected Saab's GlobalEye surveillance aircraft over Boeing's E-7 Wedgetail. The debate now extends beyond military equipment. It involves industrial partnerships, Arctic security, procurement flexibility, and long-term strategic independence. Defense analysts warn that while trade disputes can often be negotiated, rebuilding strategic trust is usually much more difficult. And when consumer behavior, trade policy, and defense cooperation all begin shifting at the same time, it points toward a much larger transformation. Number 1. Diversification accelerates. Canada redraws its future. Viewed individually, alcohol export losses, consumer boycotts, agricultural tariffs, and defense disagreements may seem unrelated. Together, however, they reveal a broader trend that is becoming harder to ignore. Canada is increasingly discussing diversification across trade, defense, supply chains, and industry. Similar conversations are taking place across Europe and other allied nations as governments reassess vulnerabilities exposed by recent geopolitical tensions. This does not mean the Canada-US partnership is ending. The two countries remain deeply connected through trade, automotive manufacturing, and continental security. What is changing is the assumption of long-term dependence. Governments and businesses are increasingly seeking alternatives and backup options. That shift may become the most significant outcome of current disputes, as diversification is increasingly viewed as a strategic necessity rather than simply an economic choice. And that brings us to the biggest takeaway from all of these developments. Verdict: North America changes, the old playbook ends. The biggest takeaway is that this story is no longer simply about tariffs. What began as a trade dispute has expanded into a broader reassessment of economic, industrial, and strategic relationships. Consumers are changing purchasing habits. Governments are reconsidering procurement decisions. Businesses are reevaluating supply chains. Even long-standing defense institutions are experiencing new pressures. For automotive enthusiasts, this matters more than many realize. Canada and the United States operate one of the world's most integrated automotive manufacturing networks. Changes in trade policies, investment flows, supply chain strategies, or industrial planning could eventually affect vehicle production, factory jobs, component sourcing, and future vehicle programs throughout North America. The future of the partnership remains uncertain, but one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Both countries are entering a new era defined by greater caution, greater diversification, and a willingness to rethink long-standing assumptions. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think the Canada-US relationship will eventually return to its previous level of cooperation? Could growing consumer boycotts eventually affect the automotive industry the same way they have affected other sectors? Is diversification a smart long-term strategy? Or does it risk creating new economic challenges? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your perspective helps drive the conversation. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next vehicle updates, industry developments, and automotive deep dives here on Piston Pundit. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's plenty more to explore.